You're listening to sermons from La Cañada Congregational Church and Pastor Kyle Sears. Join us in person every Sunday at 10 a.m. in La Cañada for worship. You can find more information about our church online at lacañadachurch.org.
Well, in this world, there's one equation: the harder you work, the better your station. It's true. Well, tonight on the news, I heard them say that the man in the plaza had a resume. Yeah. It just goes to show you how wrong you can be. It just goes to show you how wrong you can be. It just goes to show you how wrong you can be. I didn't write that one, but I've always been kind of stuck by it. It is good to be with you here this morning in the hometown and in the church of my youth on the weekend of my dad's 85th tomorrow. I want to make clear that this is lovely weather. I mean, I appreciate you guys trying to make me feel at home and everything, but when we checked out in the narthex, it was 16 degrees at home, and there was snow flurries yesterday. So, when I left, I thought to myself, this is going to be great. I get to come to chilly La Cañada and put the shorts on. So thank you. And I also want to commend you and Kyle and all of you of this congregation for the broader works that you are doing here in this community now, to be an inclusive community within La Cañada, and a voice that counters so much of the religious garbage that is far too prevalent right now. You're doing works that weren't happening when I was here as a younger person, and maybe not much since. And so I thank you for that, and I know it's making a difference. Thank you, too, for your support of us as we attempt to do some silly little things in Anchorage that maybe haven't been done a lot either. And I also, to be very specific, want to give Kyle props for having the guts to spend 4 weeks in Ecclesiastes. These are biblical texts that rarely see the light of day in the church world. And I've had a file going on Ecclesiastes for much of the 40 years in which I've been following Jesus, but I have never actually taught much of anything from it other than the most famous little bit, which is from Ecclesiastes 3. And about there being a season and a time for all things under heaven. And that's only famous because of the Pete Seeger or Bird song from 1965 with that gorgeous, shimmery Rickenbacker guitar that was being played by, everybody there, and you could hear that, and it was kind of associated with the peace and love era and everything. That's it. And one of the reasons why it's not actually used that often is because Ecclesiastes isn't necessarily happy. It is sober, and it is supremely sober about the human condition. And Kyle has rightly noted in the past couple of weeks that it would be termed counter-narrative, that it provides a very different perspective on things that are generally taught, and certainly simpler, more complicated, than the very simple sibling that is Proverbs, also found just before it. We know that Proverbs is a collection of sayings and of teachings that is designed to give younger people, perhaps upper crust young people, the basics of a way of living well, advice on practical ethics, how to do right and to not screw up, with the promises and threats that both hold. In the bodies of wisdom literature in the Hebrew scriptures, Proverbs is a little bit something like this. This is how to live a successful and purposeful life. Put in a quarter, win a prize. Do the right thing and live well, and you will be blessed. The world is orderly. So too is our good God, who orders all things. In the realm of work, it's real Ben Franklin kind of stuff. Early to bed and early to rise makes a man, you know it well. Work hard and you will prosper. Maybe you'll even figure out how to bottle lightning, or you'll invent the printing press or something like that. That's Proverbs. Ecclesiastes is a little bit something else, more in the vein of, I put in the quarter and I got nothing because the machine was broke. Sorry. Unfortunately, life works that way sometimes. And while working hard and living decently may be all right and is probably better, more or less, than the alternative, death is the only true certainty. And God may not be promising a whole lot else. Good luck. Enjoy the small things. The big ones may take us nowhere. If you want to go on, though, in the wisdom literature of the Hebrew canon, at least Ecclesiastes is not the book of Job. In that one, I put in the quarter, I got nothing, the machine fell on top of me, it burned my house, it killed my family, and meanwhile, while all this was happening, my friends laughed at me. Well, I told God to do better for a punk, but it turned out that God was just playing dice with the whole darn thing, and my hair fell out. So we'll take Ecclesiastes over Job any day. Ecclesiastes tell us, as Kyle has noted and will note again next week, that there is nothing new under the sun, that we come from dust and we will return to dust, maybe a little bit better off than the animals and maybe not. We can't count on institutions and authorities. The creation and our lives are gifts to be enjoyed in the face of that inevitable death. But beware of flying too high, in work or otherwise. Absurdities, absurdities, all are absurdities, which is a fine translation by me. I'll go with that one. It could also be vanity, vanity, all are vanities, or meaningless, meaningless, all is meaningless. They all work. The Hebrew word that is shot throughout this, hebel, literally means vapor, as when the sun hits a cool river and a little puff of condensation floats up a couple of feet until it too disappears. Or when the steam comes out of a storm drain on a cold day, which happens where I live now, even if you haven't seen it. It's not fog, it's not a cloud, it's not rain, it's wispy and smallish. It's insubstantial, and it vanishes quickly in the grand scheme of things. It does not last. It is gone. It is carried away in the air. So the chunk of Ecclesiastes today, from the middle of chapter 5 to the middle of chapter 6 that Kyle read, dives in more specifically about the nature of work and of wealth, and the designs that are made to do both of them, hopefully well, for the benefit of ourselves and of our families. And this is where we get more of that counter-narrative stuff that Kyle's been talking about. From Ecclesiastes, we have to say, sorry, Ben Franklin. It's not that simple. What if our work, our strivings, our accumulation of homes and goods and a stable or even comfortable life for ourselves and for our families are really no different than the vapors? Now, I can say something here is I'm a product of the La Cañada school system, K through 12. Oak Grove Elementary, rest in peace, through Foothill Intermediate School, just around there, rest in peace, and graduating ultimately from La Cañada High 40 years ago, Spartan pride. And I suspect that I am, or that there is an updated version of this path that is a goal for more than a few parents that they have for their precious offspring, which motivated them perhaps to move to this town and to somehow buy into this absolutely insane real estate market. And this might be a path that some of you have made. Now, in truth, it kind of worked for me. It didn't hurt me getting into a half-decent college, and yes, later grad school, though in my case it certainly wasn't med school or law school or business school, which are likely the preferred choices of well-intentioned parents with jumbo mortgages. Now, no doubt I had opportunities, and they were good ones, and they opened doors. And I've long joked that getting schooled in La Cañada was the best private education that public money could buy. But two other thoughts have come to the fore as well, things that I began to notice in my first year of high school at La Cañada High. The first one, and I preached on this last January when I was here, is I learned soon enough that the great Jackie Robinson, one of my heroes and one of my favorite Americans, grew up on Pepper Street in northwest Pasadena, 4.7 miles, thank you Google, away from Carmel Road, where mom and dad raised the three of us. And yet Jackie Robinson's experience as a youth, and that of many since from that same neighborhood, may have been about as diametrically opposed to my experiences as would be conceivable within a 5-mile span. You think of the Arroyo. It is indeed a great chasm in more ways than just simple geography. There's a social and economic gap also of wide proportions between people all made in the image of God. And from that, there are real questions of justice, of oppression in a province, as it says here in Ecclesiastes. And these are holy questions that need to be asked and answered and not just ignored. The second thing that came to the fore is that there was a dark side, a very dark side with multiple elements to it that was part and parcel of being a teen growing up in this town. Some of these were undoubtedly similar to the shadows of adolescence that can be found anywhere. Some of them may have been unique, but they are certainly not what the real estate agents would highlight for prospective home buyers wanting to get their kids in La Cañada schools. It was spring of my freshman year at La Cañada High that I and some of the other baseball players were invited to our first big party with a lot of the upperclassmen. We got in that door with our smuggled and unlawfully purchased 6-packs of Henry Weinhardt's, and we got another form of education. Immediately aside on the living room table, somebody had pulled a large mirror off of a wall, and in the middle of it was a notable mound of cocaine. The first time that I had seen that in person and not in the movies. And there were a number of my fellow Spartans who were familiar to me who were taking turns and kneeling down to partake in a line or two. Now, a lot of my peers in high school had come from homes with some wealth. A lot of them had at least one parent who was working hard a lot of the time, perhaps what we would call big jobs. Maybe there was a lot of work travel involved. Many of my friends came from homes where their parents had split or were splitting. A lot of my peers had problems. That's all I knew them to be at the time. Turns out they were probably emotional and mental health problems, but I didn't know that then. And as time would tell, having just celebrated my 40th anniversary, I did not go to the reunion. It's a little bit far. A lot of my friends got caught up in pretty substantial substance abuse. The reality was that the interior stories of life in La Cañada were actually different than the ones that were on the outside, where people could see things. Now, if we go ahead 40 years, I don't want to be one to draw an immediate equivalency. There are some things that are undoubtedly different for La Cañada High Spartan kids than they were for us. Some things are better. There's a lot more awareness of mental health matters in highly intense academic environments, or for kids who are different, maybe queer. And it's wonderful, truly wonderful. This is something that really amazes me, that this church has been part of developing and supplying those resources. Things like peer friends who can make sure that people don't feel they're necessarily alone if that's something they want. This is saving lives quite literally. If I go back, and Peter and I were talking about this the other day, some of our peers didn't make it out of that time. If there's a chance to help some of the ones now, fantastic. But there might be some other things that aren't as good. I've seen this. I saw this as a college professor for a bunch of years. While there was indeed academic pressure in my day, it's pretty clear that it's far worse now on kids. That it starts earlier, it cuts deeper, and that truthfully, and let me be the one to proclaim this, little of it is of lasting value. To wit, Harvard asked many of its accepted incoming first-year students to take a gap year so that they can decompress some from whatever absurdities, to use the word, that they put themselves through in high school that would maybe get them into Harvard in the first place. They have found that the kids are so high-strung and so screwed up, and that they have found their mental needs are so great that they simply don't function well right away unless something changes, unless there's a pause. Or more nearby, Caltech. Caltech still has a default principle in play that all of their undergrads are supposed to be playing a varsity or club sport in order to have outside interests and to have friends. Why? Because they had too many of their kids killing themselves from the pressures that are there. This is why when I got to college and was a local athlete, we played Caltech in baseball and win approximately 27-1. They weren't necessarily good at these things, but the school knew they needed to play them for their very lives. Harvard and Stanford Harvard and Caltech are basically the top of the academic mountain in their respective disciplines. And that's the view institutionally that they found with their students. And so we need to say it and say it loud, because there's a lot of noise made about this stuff, and there's quite an industrial complex that has arisen around it. Academic counselors, test counselors, this, that, and everything else that panicked parents will pay for. It turns out that tiger moms and their ilk aren't actually telling the full story. Ecclesiastes tells us, the teacher tells us, that the whole process of wealth and of its successes exact a toll. It tells us that there will be found sleep and rest with simple work, but that, quote, the abundance of the rich will not let them sleep. This is a grievous ill that I have seen under the sun, and it lies heavy upon humankind. That was written or compiled 2,300 years ago. Maybe it had some insight. Riches were kept by their owners to their own hurt, and that there is an isolating reality to all of this, quote unquote, toiling for the wind, as if you can control it. Now, we have to note that Jesus teaches similarly in many other places. I think supremely in the Sermon on the Mount, from Matthew chapter 6. Do not store for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust consume and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust consumes and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Jesus didn't get that out of nowhere. He knew his Ecclesiastes. Moths, rust, vapors, absurdities, empty toil, none of these things will last. Enjoyment can be found, Kyle has noted it rightly, probably more in sharing. Sharing, in fact, but to a lesser and reasonable extent, in decent and balanced work. And as our text concludes, maybe it's better to see reality more clearly and to keep our labors and their designs at a healthy scale. Maybe it's simple. A good meal and a gentle conversation with loved ones, maybe younger loved ones and friends, can be, in fact, a gift from God that you maybe can count on. So be it. Amen.